Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sinead Donovan, and you're very welcome to our webinar, New Business as Usual. I do know a lot of you out there in digital land, but welcome to the people that I don't know. It is rather bizarre to be talking to a screen, but I'm hoping that you can see me, and I'm hoping you bear with us as we go through this panel event. I think we can all agree that in the last 2 to 3 months, our lives have changed dramatically. Indeed, who could have foreseen that the second series of our Looking to 2020 events would be virtual? But I'm delighted to say that we have a great panel together to talk about what is a very live condition and event for us, which is the impact that COVID-19 has had on our businesses. So before I introduce the panel, there is a few housekeeping things to go through, if you just bear with me. We are using Microsoft Teams live event functionality, and as such, the cameras will only work for the panelists. We will toggle the camera between those that are talking, unless there's just going to be a small bit of chat, and we'll leave it as we don't want to toggle the cameras too much. As an audience, your cameras are not showing and your microphones are muted. So the way that you can interact with us, and please do interact with us, is by using the live Q&A box. What we will do is we will keep about 15 minutes at the end to try to deal with some of your live, your questions and your answers, and the panelists have said that they'd be very happy to deal with them. So what is the vision that I see for this webinar? Well, for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to pass over to the panelists who, for about 2 minutes each, are just going to introduce themselves, tell us where they work, what type of teams they manage, and I suppose critically, what type of impact COVID has had on them. We'll then move into a panel discussion where we'll essentially try and look at what has happened in the past few weeks, the impact on business, and looking forward how we will re-engineer our working patterns and our working styles. So with that, I'm delighted to pass over to our 4 panelists: Loretta Lee of Microsoft, Caroline Curtis of Nuance Communications, Irene Minogue of Minogue Consultancy, and Mark Devereaux of JCD Group. And we'll start off with Loretta, if you'd like to introduce yourselves to the audience.
Great, thank you, Sinead, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel today. Hi everyone, my name is Loretta Lee. I'm a finance director in Microsoft Ireland, based out on our relatively new campus in Leopardstown. I'm in a global role. I lead our global statutory controllership function for approximately 100 of our most complex Microsoft entities. I have a team of about 50 people, geographically dispersed across the globe, but primarily in 3 key centres of excellence for statutory accounting, based in Singapore, Dublin, and Reno, Nevada. Within Microsoft, we very much have a flexible work environment, and we're very comfortable working with technology. But the last few months have been a very unusual and challenging environment for us, despite that level of comfort with using technology. However, as we look across our teams across the globe, each team, depending on their geographic location, has had a different experience, and I'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. But it's been a great opportunity for us to learn from each other and from the teams that were impacted initially, and to learn what worked for them and look at how we can apply it against the teams that are in regions that experienced COVID at a later stage. So looking forward to having this discussion with everyone today.
Fantastic. Thanks a million, Loretta. Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if we're on Irene or me, but the joys of technology, virtually, Sinead. Yeah, so I'm Caroline Curtis and I work for Nuance Communications. Nuance leads innovation in conversational AI. So what we do is our innovation in conversational AI actually begins with listening and analysing and a deep understanding of what the unique setting for every different entity that we serve we have expertise across healthcare, financial services, telecommunications, and government. And just to put that into context, what does that mean? So can smarter lung cancer screening lower mortality rates? And we've proven, yes, it can. So with our Parascribe lung cancer screening tools, working with our doctors, we are catching 80% more lung cancers earlier. The normal average would be 16% analysis for early diagnostics. So we say that not alone are we coming up with solutions, but we are helping doctors to save lives. And that has obviously been very powerful in this environment, because healthcare and the dependencies that our healthcare partners and customers rely on us has been critical, that we would not miss a beat as we moved from being a team that was 100% office-based to 100% remote. The team, I lead up the international finance and operations side. We've 2 main centres of excellence, one in Bangalore and one in Dublin, and then we rely on some external providers in some of the smaller markets. For example, GT in Korea. We've got teams in Brazil, Israel and Japan that are external. And the team is responsible really for supporting the entire business from a finance perspective. So whether that is accounting, statutory, closing the books, mergers and acquisitions. We've actually just gone through a spin-off of our auto business, so that was quite lifting, and then working through accounts payable, T&E and order to cash, all the while supporting the business and getting these deliverables out to really important customers. So it'll be interesting to talk about that.
Fantastic, thanks Caroline, and absolutely the services you're doing are critical at this point in time to keep the doctor's diagnostic ability alive. So apologies for that first hiccup and first hurdle there, that was my fault. So now we'll go to Irene, who will introduce herself. Thanks, Irene.
No problem, thanks Sinead. Good afternoon everyone. My name is Irene Minogue. I'm a leadership coach for individuals and teams. I work with lots of professional services firms and some blue chip organizations across the private sector. I also sit on the senior public services coaching panel, so I work with a lot of leaders across our governmental departments, which are under a lot of pressure at the moment, as everybody can understand. In terms of, I suppose I've worked with Grant Thornton actually since about 2008. My relationship goes back that long, when I think the firm, probably Sinead, might have been in excess of just about 200 people to the size it is today. And I suppose my work both in Grant Thornton across various sectors, I would work with partners, directors, CEOs, other business leaders at an individual level. At a team level, then I would also work with teams building high performance, building team strength, that kind of thing. And also I would facilitate a number of strategy sessions for organizations as well. So my role, I suppose, is different to my panelists, a little bit different today, in that I'm not an employer. But I have seen a myriad of challenges as well as positives with a lot of my clients over the last number of months. And I think, you know, from my perspective, all of my clients are obviously leaders. But even though they're coming from different types of businesses, some traditional, some multinational, more newer businesses, and some smaller businesses. Some of the businesses are doing particularly well in this pandemic, and some are not. But I suppose the challenges for a lot of my clients are very common, in that, number one, I suppose we're dealing with lots and lots of uncertainty, and a lot of my clients, and as we all are, trying to, I suppose, build certainty in an uncertain environment. A lot of my clients are trying to manage the boundaries and juggling between personal and professional life. I suppose huge concerns over what's going on in markets, huge concerns over their customers, and very much their employees. And finally, I suppose what we've discussed previously as well is certainly people, now that we've moved into phase one, there's a certain reticence about going back into the office, and that's kind of interesting as well. So lots of challenges, and really, really looking forward to participating today. So thank you for the opportunity again, Sinead.
Super, thanks, Irene. So I think it's safe to say you're the soft, fluffy one amongst the hard-nosed finance people on the panel. So we look to you to keep us on the straight and narrow. And finally, Mark, blessed art thou amongst women. Do you want to introduce yourself and your role? Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone, and thanks again to Grant Thornton for the invitation. So my name is Mark Devereaux. I'm the Director of Corporate Development and Strategy with a property development company based out of Cork called JCD Group. Previously, I would have spent 6.5 years with ID Ireland based on the west coast of the US. Right up, started actually just in 2008 when the world had changed at that point. So it's interesting to be back at another junction in my career where the world is changing. I suppose, and before that I spent 7 years in London, split between British Telecom and Morgan Stanley. Just to give you a bit of background about the company that I work for. So it's we would have built 1.6 million square foot of commercial space. That includes office, light industrial, manufacturing, and we also have a data center business that we just started this year with a US JV partner, and we just started construction of a data center in Clonshaugh in Dublin. As was the other thing we do have ongoing is we have a 250,000 square foot office scheme in Cork City's Docklands called Penrose Dock, and we're actually right in the middle of completing that. Well, sorry, we have 8 weeks to go to complete that, but we're in the middle of 125,000 square feet of office fit outs. And obviously we're getting calls from all around the world asking about how those offices should look now within, in the new office environment. So we're going through everything from detailed design through to how we're actually going to deliver the offices, and then ultimately how people's employees can actually occupy those offices once they're open. Okay, sorry. Generally, JCD's business is actually predominantly based on multinationals. So, over 70% of our revenue is generated from the multinational sector, and within that sector, the vast majority of those are US multinationals. So, just to wrap up, as I said, we have a scheme that we're in the middle of. Thankfully, it's 70% let at this stage. So what we're really doing at the moment is just figuring out with our clients how they will be able to move in, and then once we've handed over the space, how their staff can use it safely in the new environment.
Brilliant, thanks a million, Mark. And what I will say is that I've seen some of Mark's slides for the end of the session, and there is some very good takeaways for the audience here as to what offices should look like and will need to look like, unfortunately, in business as we go forward with the current restrictions. So I think they will be very helpful slides that will flash up at the end. So look, I want to get into the crux of it. As I say, I'm trying to structure this in really a little bit of a look back, what we've learned to date, the current situation, and look forward. So obviously in a global, we're in a frame globally that we've never been in before. Loretta and Caroline, you have both said that as global businesses, you have teams across the world, and they've at various different times gone into lockdown and are coming out of lockdown. And I suppose my question to all of you, but maybe to Caroline and Loretta first, is what has been the biggest challenge that you have seen to date for your teams, and what have you learned as teams begin to go back into the new business as normal? Is there learnings we can get from some countries that are ahead of us in the curve, that what we could do maybe differently or better? So maybe Loretta, if I could pass to you in the first instance.
Okay, thanks, Sinead. So within my global team, I think we've been in quite a privileged position in that we were able to transition to a work from home environment very quickly and relatively seamlessly due to the wonderful Microsoft technology that we're now seeing so many companies enabling their working from home to leverage. From late January, we've been talking about the impact of COVID-19 in my global team. From late January, our Singapore team, our team in Korea and also in China started to transition to a work from home environment. Certainly in China, it was very strict. Lockdown, full lockdown, working from home. Singapore, it was more of a hybrid work from home, but the office is open if you wish to come in. So we've been talking about this for quite a while, albeit way back in late January, early February, it felt quite distant to us in Dublin. But obviously that changed quite rapidly in early March. When the decision was made to work from home, despite the flexibility and the fact that the majority of my team spend at least one day working from home, it was a big change because you're taking away the choice. Will I work in the office or will I work from home? We've invested in our new campus in Leopardstown. It's very much focused on a collaborative work environment. It's a very energized, dynamic space, and how we work and how we deliver our outcomes is through collaboration, working with others, working through others, and that is how we work. So being told that one, you have no choice to be in that environment, you have to work from home. You're in a much more isolated, despite the fact of using technology and staying connected, it feels different, and energy initially dipped. Energy dipped because of the isolation, because of not being in the environment that we enjoy and we thrive, and getting that energy from our teammates. So that was the first, I guess, noticeable change. The second, I think, was the age profile of our team, particularly in Dublin. We have a lot of working parents with young children. And this transition to working from home initially felt, you have the tools, you have the technology, we're used to doing this, but this is not a normal environment. It is a very abnormal environment. You're working at home while trying to be a teacher, a carer for young children, the support that you would normally have in place. Primarily, a lot of people would leverage grandparents to provide additional support from them. That isn't available. Creches are closed, schools are closed. So there needed to be a recognition very early on that it isn't a normal environment. We need to be realistic around the capacity of our team. We need to be realistic and very clear on the priorities that we can achieve with the constrained capacity. So they were probably the two initial items that came top of mind, probably within the first week or so, that were top of mind for me as the leader of that team, and across the board, I think for the majority of managers across the site.
Very good, and it's very interesting, Loretta, that you say, as an organisation, whilst you're very set up to work remotely, it was that lack of, or when the choice was taken away from your teams, that it became an impact, and you saw, as you say, energy dip in, a pull on people's times, and it's how to effectively manage that. And maybe Irene, could I jump to you, because I think that's probably something that you're witnessing quite heavily at the moment, is the how do people deal with these priority clashes, and how do we navigate it?
Okay, yeah, I certainly absolutely agree with what Loretta just said there. I think as well, I think it's interesting what you were saying, but I think there was positives as well that were kind of, a lot of my clients, a lot of other clients were finding when the change happened, in that I think sometimes because there was this concern that communication was going to be lessened, people actually started communicating that a little bit more. And also, I suppose, look, at the end of the day, the relationships certainly increased in terms of authenticity. It's very, very hard to be overly rigid and overly professional when you have your child coming in asking about homework. You know what I mean? So it certainly was a great leveler, I think, for a lot of people. But also, I think, just another point that Loretta made around while Microsoft obviously would have all the wherewithal to get people ready, a lot of traditional organizations that I would work with had never worked from home, and I suppose from that perspective we're really concerned about it, but then we're forced upon it, and actually there was quite surprise positivity with that. But I think what I have seen is people genuinely listening to their staff, because I think at the very start people were trying to kind of pull together, what do we do? We'll put this structure in place, that structure in place, but people don't, you know, survive very well under rigid structures in that environment, because people are coming from different places. So I found that actually people's empathy levels had increased actually a lot, and people were listening to their staff. And I think as I suppose now we're into phase one, where, you know, it's even harder to determine when all this is going to end. I think now it's about leaders kind of saying, well, what can we do as a team? How do we manage this better as a team? So you're listening, you're kind of having kind of team huddles where, how do we manage flexibility of work? How do we manage our work hours? What do people need? And I think leadership styles have very much gone to listening to the staff rather than building the rigid structure, which actually is what a leader should be doing. So there's just interesting dynamics, Sinead, I think, going on around that, and different organizations are doing different things.
Absolutely, and I think as employers and as leaders, we are facing very different challenges as we go through this, and hence we're having to be, I think you used the term listening, and a bit more empathetic. And I know, Caroline, that's something when we discussed this at the warm-up or the pre-sessions on this, I think it's something that you as a manager and as a leader have experienced within your teams, quite some challenging personal circumstances, without breaching any confidence, but where the employer probably has had a bit of a higher duty of care and a higher need to be mindful of their staff. And how are you finding that? Is that something that's ongoing and will come back in the new normal?
Yeah, and I think where we were completely different, I suppose, than Loretta, in that everybody was office based. And particularly in India, where we've got a couple of thousand employees, we are an STPI business. And what that means is you can't take laptops or assets out of a building by law. That's the regulation. So we have to think about how we would actually buy lots of laptops and let people take them and bring them home. And I suppose we moved a couple of weeks before the lockdowns came, watching and anticipating what was happening across the world. We were looking at it from a safety and a well-being perspective. We asked people to, you know, test connectivity from home. But it was really interesting because although it was on the news everywhere, you could really see that people were like, yeah, but we don't really need to do this. So each weekend you were saying, like, you really need to test. So that set us up. But as we moved into, as you call this, the new business as usual, I think the listening is really where it became very important. And as Irene said, we ended up having daily check-in calls where directors and managers wouldn't have normally had a daily call with their teams. They might have had weekly calls. And what we asked the organisation globally to do is that, in as much as possible, please go on camera. We need to see each other and feel and you know, use all of our skills to understand what's going on with people. And we did have some challenging conversations. Myself, we had a bereavement in the family, and we all know what lockdowns and funerals, you know, you can't go. There was people we have a very multicultural team. So we have people who are at home, but their parents maybe were in Spain, or family in Italy. You know, and one can, you know, it's hard enough when you can't get down to Achill, but you know, when you don't know when the next time you're going to be able to fly to Brazil is. So we really trusted in the relationships that we had and in each other. And, you know, we encouraged people as well to take time off. And there was just days where people said, I just need a day off technology, and they took the day off. And we had one whole day where the entire organization globally shut down, Friday 2 weeks ago. And it was fantastic. And it really empowered everyone to just be off and really off technology and off email and off being 24/7 and move away from whatever chair it is they happen to be sitting on at the time. But I think there's lots of different things, notwithstanding the people with the babies and children running around. We also have people with social isolation who are living on their own. We've all kinds of, today is the 2-year anniversary of that lovely GDPR. We've data privacy, we've people living in shared houses with other people. So I think we are very resilient as organisations, and I think that one of the things was the resilience and trust combined together is really what has brought us on, and I think that will be what we see as we move forward.
Brilliant, thanks, Caroline. And look, yeah, I mean, I think that trust factor is something that is immense, and it's something that, you know, we're going to have to embrace as employers going forward. Because I think the days of everybody being sitting in the office and seeing everybody and seeing what they're doing may well have gone. I think that's very difficult for traditional firms like accountants. But Mark, to that end, I mean, you deal with multinationals that are coming into the country, and you spec the buildings that they are building out. We'll hold off on these slides just for 1 minute, Valerie, if that's okay. Have you seen any change to how, bar the social distancing and bar all these measures, have you seen any changes to what companies are talking about doing? Because just to give me 2 minutes on this. So, for example, we've got a new building in Dublin, in Grant Thornton, and you're speccing our new building in Cork. And a lot of the things we are doing in those buildings is our USP. It's our gym, it's our collaborative space, as Loretta said, in Microsoft. It's the restaurant, it's the coffee shop, it's all those things which really now might be largely redundant for a while. So do you see a change as to how multinationals are talking about doing up their offices?
To be honest, no. And what they've and the people we deal with, you know, at the moment, they range from people in Israel to London to New York to Seattle to California. And the view is, I suppose, and a lot of them are you know, they've been in the roles a long time. And their view is that, you know, 8 weeks doesn't change 10 years of learning. So what they're trying to do is you know, stick to the original layouts that they would have in terms of, and to be fair, especially with US multinationals, they would have always allowed a lot of space within the office. The desks will be larger, the space in between, the breakout areas, you know, people wouldn't be butted up against each other. And so what we've been doing is we've been planning the offices, and then they've kind of been applying the guidelines within social distancing on those offices, and then saying, well, you know, as things progress, we can allow this many people back in, and then on phase 2, we can allow this many. So they're keeping the I suppose, the overall layouts and the look and feel of the offices, because they've worked, you know, very well, and this stuff they've learned over the last 10 years in terms of collaboration space, you know, meeting rooms, you know, desk space, you know, ancillary facilities that get the best out of the employees. So they kind of don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But then obviously they are looking at ways that they can get people back in there, but obviously make sure that it's safe from a social distancing perspective.
Okay, so really they're juggling the short-term needs with what they hope is that in the long term things will not change for good, and we'll be able to go back to the collaborative working.
Exactly, and one of the things I kind of seen that you know, initially people were looking at was, you know, perspex screens in between desks and stuff. And of the 6 companies that looked at it, now one of them has decided to go with it because they feel you're actually, is visibly would worry you more than what you actually need to do, you know, with the whole 2-meter circulation and stuff. So what they rather is a kind of, you know, a sticker or signage approach, rather than, you know, putting someone like behind a bank counter and, you know, saying, oh, you're safe to work in that environment, because it just gives the wrong message.
Yeah, I think it is exactly what it's doing. It's putting a barrier up against people, isn't it? And I think at this time it's barriers that need to be taken down. I think that's fascinating, and the pictures that are shown there on our screen are, you know, indicative of the type of work you're doing in buildings to do that. Loretta, obviously in this type of environment, what's crucial is trying to keep teams together. Whilst we're very much apart, is keeping things together, finding what is the commonality, engendering a little bit of fun, a little bit of camaraderie. Is there anything that you guys have done that is harnessing that, or any, and without giving away any secrets, anything you can tell us?
So as I said, our team are highly collaborative. We work very closely together. So now that we are in working from home, it's more critical than ever to ensure that we have regular connections. It's very simple things. I've always been a real advocate of, when I'm engaging with my team in Singapore or in the US, to always use the camera. It gives that personal connection. You're not just hearing a voice talking to your computer, you're actually able to connect with someone, see their expression. So for every call we do, no matter how many times you've spoken to that person in a particular day, our modus operandi is always we put on the camera. It's just our default. It gives that personal connection. I think as Caroline outlined also, it's just been more deliberate in how we engage. So we're not having the corridor conversations, the coffee doc catch-ups, how are things, how was your weekend? So it is important to create space for that as well. When we start a call, we do a check-in. Again, if you've talked to someone multiple times that day, you won't do a check-in, but if we haven't spoken in a day or two, we'll do a check-in. How are you feeling? What are your concerns? And there's a huge amount of trust and transparency through that engagement. So I think that has been really helpful. I have a 30-minute coffee sync with my directs where we don't talk about work. It might be about, what is the Netflix recommendations for the weekend ahead? It's the 30 minutes a week where work is off the table, but it's really important to actually just have a non-work conversation like you would in your normal office environment. And we have a really strong culture and climate team as well, who have done a lot of fun activities. So we have, every second Friday at lunchtime, we do a Microsoft Family and Friends quiz. Gets quite competitive. We use Kahoot and we use Teams. And again, it's just an opportunity to have a little bit of fun, keep that team connection. But that is so important. Across our site, our governance team have regular all hands, which they would not normally have before this pandemic. And that's really about keeping people informed and connecting with them as well. So I would say, just that connection and just being really deliberate about that connection has been so critical.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think Kahoot has never been a busier website than it is now. I've had endless hours of fun on that, and TikTok, but please don't look at my TikTok account. Irene, just to that point, we're talking about conversations, virtual conversations, keeping it more deliberate, I think was the term that Loretta used there, engaging with cameras on. Can I just ask that, obviously as leaders and as employers, sometimes there is a need for more direct conversations, more difficult conversations. Is that something we should hold off until we're back into a face-to-face environment, or is it possible to do it on a screen?
Look, I think, number one, again, it goes back to the uncertainty. When are we all going to be back in the office? Can you actually hold off critical conversations? Personally, I feel that if something needs to be said, and I suppose it's important, it needs to be said, and one can't wait until that time. And again, I think it's about getting used to doing things in front of your PC. So on the one hand, people are preparing more for conversations. So when giving feedback, particularly, people are becoming more specific and giving specifics on feedback, which is critical. And actually, from that perspective, I think it's working better in many organizations. But to have coaching conversations is a little bit more tricky, because people might sometimes be tempted to over-prepare in advance of a conversation in front of a laptop, whereas having a coaching conversation is very much around listening to where the other person is at. And that's where I think some leaders are finding it quite challenging. So I think it's striking that balance, Sinead, but I think, you know, because people want to be able to say, oh, I'll hold off till we get back to the office on that, we can't, because we don't know what that's going to look like. And I think we have to get used to the here and now.
Yeah. Okay. No, and I think that's we just don't know what when we are going to get back.
Exactly. And I think that's the hardest thing for most people at the moment. And personally, I think it is about learning to live with that uncertainty, not seeking to anchor yourself in what's going to happen, but instead actually listening to what people are going through right now. And I suppose, you know, working through that.
Absolutely. And I think as one of the accountants around the table and the panelists here, uncertainty for accountants is something we just are not comfortable with at all. So we need to know what's going on. As I move into the final kind of questions, I would be keen to just remind everyone in the audience to please tap in your Q&A there. Not everyone will see it. It will just be the panelists and the producer. So don't worry, you're not going to type in questions that everybody, 100 people are going to see. But look, if we kind of move the conversation to, you know, we are going to phase back into work. Some of us already have started phasing back into work at this stage. I know we opened our offices last week. Caroline, what without giving anything away, what are the plans for Nuance? Are you embracing the working from home? Is it going to become the norm, or is there a plan to return?
Well, we're in a very interesting situation because we had planned to leave the building that we're in at the moment, that has been home to us for the last 8 years, on the week of the 20th of June. So we have a new building, which is under, you know, inside. It's a bit like what Mark is saying. Our plans are in place, but obviously the construction internally couldn't go ahead during the lockdown. So that's just kicked off. So we're going to be in this hybrid situation where everyone has left on the 12th of March, 20 Merrion Road, and actually won't return to there. They will return to our new location in Harcourt Street. Actually, it'll be much more suitable, and as for planning, it's a bigger location, much more space, fabulous big open area, a bit like you have there, Sinead. We've got a big open area in it, and we'll probably move through a hybrid approach. So we have to be mindful as well that some people will be constricted by childcare and schools, and that is going to dictate a timeline which is outside of our control. So we're not really being driven by the August deadlines or any other deadlines set down by the government. One, the building won't be ready until around the end of August, and two, we have to be mindful that of folks that will be just dealing with whole childcare things. And I can't imagine, you know, as well what it would be like. I'm very lucky of a 15-year-old. But I can only imagine what 6- and 7-year-olds going back to school after being out for 6 or 7 months. That will be a whole thing. We've people returning from maternity leave, and we have people going on paternity leave. So all of these things will happen. And just like we talked about performance there, this is business as usual. So we will really look to the, I think, choice versus mandated, and taking real care to understand different people's circumstances, whether that's children or that they're living in a shared house with 6 other people and their needs maybe to get out and back to the office for a day or two. So we're trying to balance all of the needs of the employees, but totally overriding that will be the safety and the well-being of the staff.
Absolutely. Okay, and I think that's the seesaw we need to balance. And I think some questions are coming in now, which is along those lines on you know what the office environment will look like, and we'll come to them in a little bit. But Mark, you probably are slightly different in the panel in that you're dealing with you're dealing directly with companies coming in, so inward investment companies. From a corporate Ireland perspective, you've obviously seen a bit of a hiatus, a bit of a pause. Do you have any sense for how long that's going to go on for, or are companies getting edgy, or are they just going to hunker down, or what?
To be honest, we were very fortunate that two what we would call new name companies that were coming to Ireland and actually Cork for the first time proceeded throughout this, even though, you know, it was at the start of the whole, you know, when things started to close down here, but they decided that they had already done their diligence. They had gotten so far down the line. They knew what they were going to do here over the next 3 to 5 years, and they were happy with the decision. So those have continued regardless. New stuff since then. Obviously, it's tapered off dramatically. You know, probably not seen those levels since, you know, 09, 10, and 11. And I think, you know, obviously, you know, you've got organisations like ID Ireland that will obviously be out there still talking to companies. But, you know, think of how, you know, I just think back to my own time there in 08, 09 and 10, where, you know, people were like, well, we can't really do anything right now because we don't know where the world is going. But they'd meet you, they'd talk to you. You know, you could go and present, you could keep them up to date on stuff, you know, what was happening. Whereas, you know, they're in a situation where they physically can't go meet, you know, potential new client companies. So I think the existing companies, obviously like Nuance and Microsoft, who are embedded here, and our own companies, people like Qualcomm and McAfee and ForcePoint, you know, they have the infrastructure, they have the people, they have the teams. You know, they'll continue to look at opportunities and maybe even see this as an opportunity to grow here. But I think new stuff obviously will be very, what would you say, you know, reluctant to make that step. Also, if you've never, let's say you're looking to make a selection on where you want to set up your international office or you know, an engineering centre, it'd be very hard to do it and not be able to visit that location and kind of kick the tires and meet with other companies. And I know the guys in IDA do a great job, and obviously they'll be doing virtual itineraries, but you know, I think people still would have to get on that plane at some point and walk the streets and meet other companies and, you know, see what's actually on the ground there. So I would say new stuff is, you know, is definitely going to be very slow for a while.
Okay, yeah, and I think the IDA probably have a bit of a task on their hands as to how they grapple with getting or attracting these companies back and getting. And you've raised an interesting question there, Mark. Business travel, obviously, business travel has ceased for us all, which is a blessing. But I certainly, you know, there's pros and there's cons. I certainly found that I now realise that the time I got in a plane to be able to think and switch off is time that I am missing. But there's pros and cons to it. I mean, Loretta, do we think business travel is ever going to come back, or do we need it to come back?
It's a really interesting question. In my global role, I travel internationally 6-7 times a year. Back in March, we started planning our global summit, where we normally have our entire team together in our corporate HQ for a week. And we made the decision early in March that we would move that to being a virtual meeting. And that requires different dynamics, and there's time zone challenges, etc. So there's a lot of other things we need to work through. Will that be the norm going forward? I think that still is to be determined. What we are finding now that we don't have the opportunity to travel is that, you know, it's really important to still have those conversations. The conversations that normally, if you knew a trip was coming up in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, you would hold off and you would have them in person. Now, you know, you need to just go ahead and have those conversations and use our technology and connect. In one way, you know, because we have such a large corporate headquarters just outside of Seattle, there has always been a need to travel because you're away from our epicenter and you need to have a presence there on a regular basis. But at the moment, everyone is working virtually. Everyone's working remotely. It's almost an equalizer for all of our international teams, because your opportunity to connect with someone is the same as someone who lives maybe 2 miles down the road from that person. Yeah. So, you know, there's opportunity that this is now creating, and to have a similar connection by being remote, versus the people that are in our corporate headquarters. But then there's also the connection you miss from being in person. So I think, will we see less business travel? Absolutely. I think we will. I think this has shown us how productive and impactful we can have conversations over tech, using technology. But will it negate all business travel? I would say, again, I think it will be a hybrid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that at the moment nobody's traveling, so it's an equalizer. I think there might be a first mover effect, that when competitors start going, might be a knee-jerk reaction. So we need to probably manage that one. So the questions are coming in on thick and fast. If I try and group a couple of them together, there seems to be a sense that working from home is obviously what people are doing now. A lot of employees are actually finding the benefits in it. And there's questions coming in. Will the companies here be given financial support to increase working from home or encourage working from home? Countered with, I suppose, a question where there are some places where it's going to be important to get people back into the office, and how do employers get that message across? So, is that something? And I don't know. Maybe Caroline, I know you said that you are going to encourage the flexible working, but do you think we're going to face a challenge that people won't want to come back into the office because they've had it? Not had it good, but have seen the benefits?
Yeah, I think it will depend. I mean, we've had to have 2 people in the office all through this, with the garda letters and stuff like that. And one very simple thing, the post comes in. We get all the post for all of international. We get tax demands, and we do have to remember that when we're thinking of it, we're not just thinking of Ireland, but we have locations that are open and running, and tax audits. So next week we've a tax audit with HMRC. Interestingly, we're not going to fly over there for it. We're going to do it on Teams. And that took a little bit of work with them to get us whitelisted. But I don't think working from home works for everyone. And I think we need to be really mindful of that. So that's why I think it's hybrid, Sinead. I don't think it's all or other. It's great if you're like me and you've got a separate room that you can come into, and that's fine. But as I said, we have some, people at the very beginning of their career that are in a shared house with 6 other people, who the only private space may be their bedroom. I've got a friend who's doing payroll from morning to night in her bedroom. So there'll be people who will absolutely can't work from home. They just don't have the space.
Yeah.
And even down to things like chairs and monitors and all of those things. My belief is it'll be a hybrid, and I think human beings will want to come back and have contact. And we probably won't fly for a while. And I'll show my age here. It'll probably be just like after 9/11, when nobody went anywhere and nobody wanted to fly, and then your competitors move. So already we're discussing how we go and meet with some of our customers, because we just have to, because they want it.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, and I think you're right about the hybrid model, and I think that maybe answers some of the questions that are coming in, whether it's, should there be financial support in working from home, or how do we attract people back into the office? I think it's going to come down to employers actually trying to understand the circumstances of their employees much more, and tweaking it. So it's not going to be a one rule fits all. Is that fair to say, Irene? We're going to have to be much more individual.
Absolutely. I think the individual approach is going to be critical. And like at the end of the day, I think we talked a lot about listening to what your employees need. There's going to be a need to be listening to your employees, but obviously in alignment with what the business requires. That's going to be critical. I had also alluded earlier, Sinead, to people having a certain reticence about going back to the office, and I think that's something that's very, very important. And I think that's for everybody. If you're a leader, if you're at the outset of your career and you're trying to determine which side of the hybrid model you want to work on, whether it's working a little bit more in the office or out of the office. I think it's a really, really good time now to take stock of what's working for you, because that in itself is building your own individual resilience right now. And you know, I think from an advice perspective of where, you know, a lot of my clients are doing at the moment is taking stock of why are they reticent about going back to the office? Is it that they're enjoying the pace of life? Is it that they're enjoying a little bit more reflection time, getting out for walks in the morning, that kind of thing? And how can they try to build certain elements of that into their future? Sometimes some of that is going to be possible, some of it is not, but it's almost determining, when am I at my best self? And I think that's really, really useful for at an individual level, but also as a leader. How can you build that in your team? If your team are really doing really well in elements of this, how can you actually harness that and move that going forward? Because I think there's a little bit of an open canvas to a certain extent, and I think that's really useful for employees, rather than trying to build structures around something we do not know what it's going to look like, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and I think it's fair to say that people like you will become very much in demand, because, you know, it's going to take a lot more time to identify the needs and identify and understand some of the concerns of employees. So, you know, we're going to need to increase our emotional intelligence, which for some of us would be difficult. Some interesting questions coming down the side. Mark, one particularly for you, which I find quite interesting. Will there be a new type of infrastructure that's being thought about, like bunkers during World War II?
No, I mean, it happened, funny enough, actually. I worked for British Telecom in London post 9/11, and there was a big move to disaster recovery then, and, you know, crazy money was spent on that kind of stuff, and then realistically it never got used again. A few clients now that actually have DR sites, because they're a financial services company, and they have to have, you know, they have to have a certain amount of people still in the office. But I think what you might see is DR sites, but, you know, kind of, you know, build that into the cost of their own model. So it wouldn't be part of your office. It would be a secondary site of, you know, somewhere else on a different network, and it can double up as, you know, okay, these 20 employees can work from there going forward, you know, with social distancing. So more of, I suppose, you know, an enhanced DR offering rather than anything like a bunker, obviously.
And Sinead, one of the questions has been, who doesn't work from home work for? And it's not just people in shared house, but for example, not everyone are accountants or payroll. So for example, our IT support, it just does not work because he has X number of laptops, they're being imaged, they're on a network. You really probably couldn't do that from home. Yeah. And so that is a role that never left our office. It's actually the one thing. And I did hear of another financial institute where they actually, at the beginning, they sent all of their IT people home to figure out could they support their networks. And so, you know, not all jobs are roles are as lucky in some ways as we can maybe do payroll from anywhere, or you know, we can get 90% of the invoices can come in, but there comes a point in time, you know, the quarter two audit was an interesting one, trying to share documents.
Very good, very good. I've just got one more question, which Loretta, or maybe given Microsoft is so global, it's probably not the right one. Questions coming in going, how are people deciding who are the first people back into the office? Are they taking into account people's needs, people's wants, or the delivery requirements? I suspect it's all together. Caroline, is that one maybe for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, straight off, IT was, you know, one that we figured that out for, and some of it will be as we work our way through who's able to come back. We have some people outside the 20-kilometre zone, for example. So even if we chose to come back next week, there's people who live in, you know, down in the country who were traveling all the time, but they're outside the zone. There's folks that are just in Wicklow and that are just slightly up the mountain. They're out. So there will be dynamics of who's allowed to travel, where they're traveling from, and really, do they need to come in first? We're not in any way looking to be first movers on this. So we are going to, in as long as possible, work our way through this and figure that out. And as well as that, hopefully people will be taking holidays now over the summer, and there will be some respite and time to think about it. At least it is summertime.
Absolutely, and it's amazing weather with that. And I think, Irene, you'd probably agree. And just the final point on this is that I'd say is that decision about who returns and when they return. An awful lot of consideration needs to be given to mental health and mental health and well-being, and I think that's something that as employers we need to be all over and make sure that we address that.
Absolutely, and listening to what people need. And the other thing is just to kind of, and it's kind of, it's to answer your question, but also to pick up on something that Caroline said, you know, around not working from home isn't for everybody. Even if it's not about the discipline that you're working in, it's actually a lot of the time it's where you get your energy from. You know, a lot of clients of mine who kind of get their energy from within themselves, we might call introverts, are happy enough in this circumstance, whereas many extroverts are exhausted at the end of the day because they're not getting their energy from the people that they normally collaborate with and everything like that. And that's very significant. You know, personally, I find it difficult, even in my job, doing a lot of this over a computer. And we all kind of, we have to be aware of that and taking that into account in a long-term way as well. So I think that's significant, as well as the mental health.
Amazing, thank you, Irene. And on that point, I have two daughters. One who probably is classified an introvert, and one who's classified an extrovert. And it's interesting to see how both they are dealing with it.
Absolutely.
And you know, I think actually as a mother, I think the impact on the kids has been huge. So you know, we do need to just be cognizant of that as well for the next generation. But look, 1 minute past one. It only leaves me to say a huge thank you to the panelists. I hope it has been an interesting presentation to the audience. Certainly I've learned a hell of a lot. And thank you very much for bearing with us on the webinar. And we will share, Mark, you're okay if we share your slides, just the photos?
Yeah, on the case study of people going back, absolutely, yeah.
Super, and we'll share contact details of the panelists. But guys, just want to wish you all a very nice afternoon. I hope you get out into the nice sun, and look after yourselves, and best of luck in the coming months. Bye.